Cenk Uygur is the larger-than-life host of the popular daily news and politics show, The Young Turks, that has amassed almost 6 million YouTube subscribers. Fiercely independent, the long-running show is able to throw punches at both the Biden and Trump camps with the freedom that Mr. Uygur claims is not possible for mainstream media. From Israel-Gaza to the US elections and his own political ambitions, Cenk Uygur has opinions in abundance, which he was more than willing to share in our interview. So, whether you consider him a Turkish delight or not a flavor of your choice, buckle up and settle in for a frank face-to-face with Cenk Uygur. Cenk, thanks very much for the time. Now, I'm curious, because obviously you deal a lot with politics and issues in the US. International news generally doesn't come up too high a lot of the time, but the Israel-Gaza thing has been going strong, and I'm wondering what impact you think the way it's developed might have on the US presidential election this year.
Yeah, it could have a significant impact, but both Biden and Trump are trying to figure out how to lose the youth vote in America. So great news for folks who don't live inside America. The young in America have now flipped, and they're decent, moral, wonderful people who are supporting the civilians of Gaza. So the older people grew up on television, and television in America is a propaganda machine. They're not in the news business, they're in the marketing business. And so older people still believe the propaganda about how Israel is a moral army, which is, of course, if you know the truth, a tragic joke, right? So, but younger people grew up on social media. So now Biden has lost 30 points among younger people, and it's probably going to cost him the election. But just as Trump is almost a guaranteed victory because of what Biden is doing in Gaza, Trump comes along and says he'll set the peace movement back 25 or 30 years and that he would deport anyone who dares to protest against Israel. So Trump is even worse. So the powerful in America are still just as horrific as they have ever been, but a young cohort is rising up to challenge them.
What chance is there, Cenk, that the younger generation might actually start to influence the older generation? Do you think they can get through to them?
No, no chance. The older generation is totally corrupt and totally brainwashed. They're brainwashed by mainstream media in America. As I said, it is industrialized propaganda. All my life in America, cable news has been telling Americans, and mainstream media all the way through the New York Times has been telling Americans that Muslims are the violent ones, as America, Israel, and its allies have dropped hundreds of thousands of bombs on top of innocent Muslim people's heads. So no, we are the violent ones, but our media lies to our people nonstop. But those days are now coming to an end. The older people, unfortunately, in general, not all of them, but in general, have believed that brainwashing. So they think, oh, it's the most moral thing to keep on killing Muslims all over the world. Thank God us and Israel doesn't. They're all terrorists, etc. So you can't, those people are infected. You can't help them. But the younger people, they're going to come up and they're going to take over this country. That's the way it works. And every generation changes. And the reason it's changed now is because social media is beating television. Television is propaganda, social media. Some of it is not real, and a lot of it is real. They're seeing the real videos from Gaza. And for young people, you're not going to talk them into supporting terrorism that Israel is doing.
It's interesting you mentioned this view about, Muslims and Muslims being terrorists, because to some degree this land dispute between Israelis and Palestinians has evolved or has been positioned perhaps intentionally as a Muslim-Jewish thing. Anyone who criticizes Israel is often accused of being anti-Semitic, for example. So I wonder what danger there is in it being portrayed as a religious conflict rather than a land dispute.
Well, that's all they do here in America. So they say that Jews and Christians, they call it a Judean-Christian heritage, is wonderful and the basis for Western civilization. And, there's still people who say absurd things like the Jews are the chosen people. That's what a lunatic would say. Well, what does that make the rest of us? Unchosen? But in terms of the reality, of course, we all know Palestinians are Muslim and Christian. And this is mainly a land grab. They're going to create a buffer zone, at least in Gaza, and take more of Gaza. And some, like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, are saying, let's just push the Palestinians into the Sinai desert and take all of it. In fact, Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, gave an interview where he said, well, Gaza would make very good waterfront property for us. So they're absolutely callous about how they're stealing the land in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. But meanwhile, here in America, they paint it as the Judeo-Christian heritage is angelic and moral and wonderful, and those no good Muslims are the terrorists. And golly gee, we had to kill them, and we had to take their land, and we had to take their oil in places like Iraq. So you'd be shocked at how much lies there are in American media.
Now, the students obviously have probably raised a lot of eyebrows because it's, apart from America, obviously it's gone global, but I think because of the reaction of the authorities to them. Take me through what you've seen happen and how you regard the response of the authorities to the student protests.
Yeah. So look, I like what you asked about religion, because it's definitely not about religion. So I have a lot of Jewish friends that I grew up with here in America, and they're all middle class. They don't control anything. They don't agree to this. They don't want this war. They think it's terrible, right? And among the student protesters, there might be more Jewish student protesters than Muslim student protesters. And of course, the largest majority are Christians and non-believers here in America among the student protesters. But all of them come together and say, no more, please, please stop killing the innocent civilians. So what did American media do? They lied about them 100%. They pretended that the student protesters were the violent ones when almost none of them did anything violent or even chanted anything wrong. So they would take videos of people chanting something outside of campus, and then you say, oh, you see how all the student protesters are anti-Semitic and they all hate Jews. What are you talking about? A lot of them are Jewish themselves. So it was all done in a propaganda effort to protect Israel. And almost every cable news host in America, the ones that pretend to disagree, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, they all lined up and they all agreed that Israel must be protected. So what they did was they raided all the campuses, they broke up every protest against Israel, and they arrested the students who did it. At UCLA, they took it an extra layer of absurdity. Pro-Israel extremists showed up and started beating the peace protesters, the students, with sticks, pepper spray, etc. The cops came, didn't arrest any of the pro-Israel protesters, even though they had done more violence than all other protesters combined in America. None of them were arrested. The next day, they arrested the peace protesters who had been beat up and assaulted. So that's what the powerful in America do. It's disgusting, but a lot of the American citizens are now rising up and saying, this is not America. This is not what we should stand for.
There seemed to be a lot of violence, according to a lot of people. There was violence against the protesters that seemed to be unjustified, the extent of it.
Oh, yeah. At UCLA, there was massive violence against the protesters. And then in New York, if you remember the terrorist Mayor Kahane, one of his cousins ran over an old lady who was a peace protester. So almost all of the attacks have come from the pro-Israel side. There's been 2 arrests, I believe. That guy got arrested, and one of the guys at UCLA got arrested. Otherwise, they don't even mind the violence as long as you're doing it to people who are trying to save Palestinian lives. In fact, they'll turn around and say the people that are in favor of peace are the violent ones and should be arrested. And now Trump is not only arrested, that he would throw them out of the country, even if they're American students. And he would deport them on behalf of his beloved Israel. That was, of course, as he was begging donors for money and basically saying, I'll do anything for the money. And that's who Donald Trump is. And unfortunately, that's also who Joe Biden is. Joe Biden has taken $11.2 million from AIPAC, and AIPAC completely controls him and about 85% of our politicians.
Now, of course, the backlash against the student protesters was not just physical by the authorities. There has been quite a backlash within some of the professional circles. For example, I think 13 of the judges appointed by Donald Trump have said they would no longer consider any graduates from Columbia University, for example.
Yeah. So what those sick people on Wall Street are saying is that they are so immoral that if you ever dared to protest for peace or to save innocent lives who happen to be Palestinian, they would never hire you. They only want immoral people. And that makes sense. If you're a robber on Wall Street and your job is to rob people for a living, well, you wouldn't want any moral, decent human beings. So you would say, oh my God, you're from Columbia? Some of the people at Columbia protested for peace. I despise them. I despise peace, and I'm 100% for Israel killing at least 35,000 people, so I don't want you to hire me. But what I would say to those students is, I know it's hurting your, potentially hurting your career, but believe me, you don't want to be hired by the monsters who don't want to hire you.
Any chance they might end up, the students might end up clearly on the right side of history, or will it all just be swept under the carpet?
No, they're definitely going to wind up on the right side of history. Look, this is what's happened in America over and over again. So we have had protesters in favor of peace through different generations. And the most obvious example is the Vietnam War. At the same college, Columbia, that's where it started, and I'm a Columbia alumni. And I'm proud that we have a history of peace protests, and peace protests that eventually work. So in the case of Vietnam, it was American boys and girls who were being sent over to die in Vietnam. And you know what they did? They beat up the protesters, they arrested them, and they said, oh, you guys are terrible and immoral and un-American. And then at the end of the day, the peace protesters were right, and they won over America. And they realized that the Vietnam War was immoral. Same thing happened with civil rights. They beat up the protesters. They say they're the violent ones. And then eventually the protesters win because they win the hearts and minds of Americans. And right now, that's what the student protesters are doing. And I love them for it. I think they're the most moral people in this country. And they're standing up for people, even though they're not of those people. Almost none of the protesters are Palestinian. But they're saying, please, please stop killing the Palestinians. They're the best of us here in America. And those peace protesters, they almost never win right away, but they win in history almost every time.
Cenk, you gave at the beginning a fairly strong condemnation of the mainstream media and the direction you feel it's taken. Of course, you know, social media has, as you've indicated too, changed a lot. There was a time when protests could be organized using just mobile phones, simply messaging and group messaging. Now, of course, it's gone to another level. How do you feel things will develop when you've now got the mix of AI changing images and changing scenes to the point where it's almost hard to know what to believe? Will the younger generation be able to filter through?
Yeah, so look, the older generation is in a lot of trouble because they have trouble sometimes, if you get old enough, discerning what's real and not real already online. When you add in AI, they're going to be very confused. But the younger generation is much more savvy. But the upside of social media is that when this bombing just happened in Rafah and 45 people were killed, they have cell phones. So you could see the people burning to death alive, right? They were alive. You see them screaming in agony as they're burning to death. And you see the babies who are dead. You see the people pulled out of the fire. You see a child whose eyes are burned shut and is blind now, and he's screaming in the hospital. And they can't stop those cell phone images from bouncing around in social media. And we can see what they're doing. And by the way, all the bombs burn people alive. America and Israel have been dropping bombs on Muslims like it's no big deal. No, every bomb is an act of terrorism. It burns children and grandmothers and aunts and uncles and mothers and fathers alive, or it crushes their heads with concrete. It's a disgusting thing to do to innocent civilians. But now we could see it with our own eyes. So believe me, American media, the mainstream media, will eventually turn back around and say, oh my God, we can't know what's true in social media because of AI. And Israel will pretend that none of it is actually happening. That's what they do every time. But it's too late. We all already saw all those innocent people being killed. And that is why it's shamed mainstream media in America so much that now even the New York Times and CNN are doing some good pieces. So the truth is now starting to surround them. And it's getting harder and harder for the people in power in America to deny the truth.
Do you think, Cenk, that enough people in America are getting to see the graphic reality of what's happening, for example, Ukraine or Gaza, wherever? Because it seems, by and large, people in the US now are so into the binge watching, you know, streaming services and looking for entertainment on social media sites like TikTok and Instagram that news has almost been sidelined to the point of people don't really care to see it.
Yeah, well, look, there's a lot of things that are happening at once. So our show's The Young Turks, and we're the largest internet news show. And what's awesome is that we're powered by the people, so they can't shut us down. In the old days, you have to have $1 billion to get on television, you know, to start a TV network. And so the powerful and the rich control everything. Not anymore. So for Young Turks, we get $5, $10, $100 at a time from people all across the world, and they can't stop us. And so social media grows stronger and stronger. But as we do all of this, there's nonstop attacks back and forth between mainstream media and social media. And I think that the message is being clearly relayed to people all across the world. Yes, this is what's actually happening in Ukraine. This is what's actually happening in Gaza. And so that's why it's driving the powerful crazy. They can't stop us from telling the truth. So these people from all across the world are now starting to build, in essence, their own media networks, as we've done at TYT. And people can come at tyt.com/team and see it. And so we tell the truth. And I don't know what the consequence of that is going to be in the long run, but at least people are beginning to wake up in America.
It's interesting to see your revolution because you seem to have a lot more freedom now in saying what you want to than you did in the past. With no repercussions?
No, there are repercussions. Sometimes people say, hey, listen, because you're not supporting Israel, I don't want to do business with you. Okay, then don't do business with me. I would rather have my morality and my decency. What do you want me to say? That, oh, no, Israel didn't kill 35,000 people? They did. Do you want me to say that it wasn't 25,000 women and children that have been slaughtered in Gaza? I don't care what you want me to say. Besides which, the great thing about social media is that I don't work for them. I work for the people who are our paying members. tyt.com/team. If people give money through there, there's nothing they could do to stop us. Nothing. So we go out there and we tell the truth on YouTube, Facebook, almost everywhere. And it's driving them crazy. They keep thinking, how do we get this guy to shut up? He's telling everybody that the peace protesters are for peace. Well, that's true. We don't want him saying things that are true, but there's nothing they could do to cancel me. They've tried 100 times. As long as I'm backed by people all across the world. And by the way, it's not just us. Every little show now is, and other news organizations like The Intercept, they keep telling the truth about, and The Guardian, they keep telling the truth about Gaza. They keep telling the truth about all of these things. And they're powered by people all across the world who have gotten tired of the rich and the powerful controlling everything. So they're chipping in, like I said, $5 and $10 at a time, going, keep keep telling the truth. And that's a runaway train. That's, by the way, Riz, why do you think they're trying to shut down TikTok in America? They're trying to shut down social media, pretending it's because they're concerned about the Chinese. No, Mitt Romney and Anthony Blinken said it on tape. We showed it on the Young Turks. They said the real reason they shut down TikTok is because young people in America are using TikTok to tell the truth about Israel. And they don't want the truth about Israel to get out in the media. So they're just trying to shut down the entire network. But it's not going to work. It's too popular. People will be enraged. And you know what's happening? A really interesting phenomenon that never happened before in America. Now they're beginning to lose the right wing. The right wing is going, wait, we're for America first, but now you're telling us, no, we have to spend $20 billion of our money, give it to Israel, when Israel has universal health care, paid family leave, and they're using this money to kill those civilians. Now a lot of the right wing's also against war. So they're like, why do we want the neoconservatives, the Dick Cheney's back? They don't like those guys. So now they're starting to lose the right wing. They've lost the left wing. I don't think Israel understands the kind of trouble that it's in. And more importantly for America and for the world, all of the powerful people in America, the defense contractors, the oil companies, the banks, it's the pharmaceutical companies. Oh my God, those guys are super powerful because they buy all of the ads on cable news and mainstream media. That way they control the media. And they buy all the politicians, because if you don't live in America, you might not know. America legalized bribery. In America, you can give millions of dollars to a politician and call it a campaign contribution, and it's legal. That's why America's become, unfortunately, it breaks my heart because I love America. It's become the most corrupt country on earth. Did you know Sheldon Adelson, a casino owner, gave Donald Trump $100 million twice, in 2016 and in 2020? And he's the one that got Trump to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and blocked internet gambling because he has casinos. I mean, it's just outright corruption. But now, new media surrounding the corrupt.
You know, Cenk, it's interesting because you talk about where the money goes and that you're able with the Young Turks to get direct funding because people want to hear what you have to say. They want to support you and they want you to keep going. Is it that media is becoming now more partisan because there are, of course, those who oppose the things you say on the Young Turks who actually will support the opposition or support the right wing and so on? Money is going down those specific channels and perhaps, I don't know, maybe middle ground is being lost.
Yeah. Well, look, I would argue we are the middle ground. And so let me explain. In the old media, everyone fights over social issues, culture war issues here in America. Oh, should we support gay people or not? Should we support black people or not? And Fox News says, no, don't support immigrants, don't support gay people. And MSNBC and CNN say, yes, support them, right? But it's all a trick. When it comes to any economic issues, like when they say, hey, let's get rid of student debt for young people, all of a sudden, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, they all agree. When it comes to any financial issues, they all agree the rich and powerful should stay rich and powerful. Now, when you get to social media, okay, yes, you have people on the left and sometimes even extreme left. You have people on the right, almost always extreme right? And they fight all day long. But eventually people get tired of seeing the same old propaganda and talking points from the right or even from the left. And so they come to people like us who are reasonable and go, hey, listen, sometimes the left can go too far. The right is against a lot of people, so we can't say yes when they say, well, we don't want you because you're Muslim or you're Latino or you're black or you're gay, etc. So that's obviously not right. And what we see all the time is people telling us, I watched everybody, you guys are the most logical ones. You actually fight for everyone. You don't do it based on religion or race or any of these things. You're for everyone, and we're winning. And those extreme right and left shows are getting smaller and smaller, and they're losing.
Actually, it is interesting because, of course, your perspective has been critical of both sides, which would put you more into the center. But I was wondering, is it that now politics has become more about the people, the personalities, the Bidens, the Trumps, rather than the issues? Of course, the issues get raised, but it's often in the shadow of the people talking about them, such as the presidents or the presidential candidates and so on.
Yes, unfortunately, again, that happens here, and it happens more with mainstream media. And there's an underlying reason for that, too. In mainstream media, if you start talking about the issues, people will call you biased. So you can't say, hey, should we have universal health care like every other developed nation? If you said yes, they'd say, oh, you're biased. You're not allowed on television. You're not allowed to write for the New York Times or Washington Post. But every developed nation has universal health care. Almost every nation on earth has universal health care. We're the only country barbaric enough that our companies block it because they want to make extra profits. So did you know that in America, if you get sick and you don't have enough money, we just let you die? That happens in almost no other country. It's a barbaric form of capitalism. And so that is all hidden when TV goes, oh, don't look at the issues. Just let's talk about personalities. Are you pro-Biden or pro-Trump? And they say, if you say things that are against Biden, that must mean you're in favor of Trump. We get accused of that all the time. No one has said worse things about Donald Trump than I have personally, let alone on my entire network, the TYT network. We even did 100 segments called Loser Donald, about what a loser Donald Trump is. But they still say, oh, you must be pro-Trump because you criticize Biden. I mean, look, if you're that unintelligent, there's not much I could do to help you. And that's almost all of American mainstream media. No, it's not just about Biden or Trump. Those are figureheads. In fact, in America, the politicians are basically servants. They're very low-level employees of the rich. The rich buy them and then go, hey, go tell everybody that higher drug prices is better. And they go out there and they go, oh, because of innovation and creativity, we will think the drug companies should make all the money in the world and we should not be allowed to negotiate prices. They're just servants. They're useless servants. That applies to Biden and Trump as well.
Well, let me back you on you saying that you're not necessarily in favor of one or the other if you're being called pro-Trump, because just to quote you said, if someone tells me they're voting for @real Donald Trump, I instantly lose all respect for them. This is very literal and includes anyone in my personal life. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Donald Trump is a lunatic. Talking about arresting peace protesters and deporting them from the country because they criticized Israel? What kind of lunatic says that? You know, the stealth fighters, they're amazing American planes because they can't get picked up on radar, right? Trump thinks they're like Wonder Woman's jet, that they're invisible to the naked eye. He's like, you look at him and you can't even see them. He's painfully stupid. He thought that injecting bleach would cure COVID. He thought that maybe we should nuke a hurricane. And his advisors had to tell him, sir, if you set off a nuclear bomb in a hurricane, it'll just spread it to the entire eastern coast of America and you'll poison people. He's like, oh, okay. He did a dementia test and thought it was an IQ test. I mean, it doesn't get any dumber than that. But despite you hearing all of this with your own ears, if you go on cable news, they'll say that I'm pro-Trump because I dared to criticize their beloved Biden. In mainstream media, if you're not doing marketing for Biden, they don't understand. They're like, I don't get it. He's doing actual news. Why won't he just do marketing for our side? Well, I won't. Biden's a monster. He greenlit this genocide in Gaza. He's not a sweet guy, as all of American media says. He's a terrible guy. They're both terrible. I think Trump is worse, but man, that is a terrible competition to be in.
Cenk, you and I both kind of know that there was a different time in politics. We're old enough to have realized things have changed, certainly in the personality aspect field of the politicians. Why has it changed like this? Why are politicians so different from, say, 20, 30 years ago?
Well, I wrote about this in my book, Justice is Coming. America got taken over by corporations. We now live under corporate rule. And the way they did it, and they explained it, they wrote a memo in 1971. This lawyer that basically wrote this memo for the Chamber of Commerce, which runs the business community in America. And he said, we should take over media. We should try to take over college campuses. They failed on that one. And we should take over the Supreme Court. And Nixon said, that's such a good idea. And he put Lewis Powell on the Supreme Court. And what Lewis Powell helped to do was to legalize bribery. They said, if corporations give money to a politician, they're just talking to them. They're not bribing them. I mean, they could be giving money for the general welfare and for charity. I mean, it's a joke. The dissenting justices on the Supreme Court said, this is a mortal danger to democracy. You are obviously going to destroy democracy if you allow corporations to just buy our politicians. But that's what the Supreme Court legalized in 1976 and 1978. They made it worse with Citizens United much later. But the bottom line is, once corporations were allowed to purchase our politicians, we lost democracy entirely. So that's why what you're sensing over the last 20, 30 years is that our politics has gotten much worse. They're crushing us in the trash compactor scene in Star Wars. The corporate rule is crushing us and crushing us. And by the way, that's why the right wing is so angry. That's why they went to Donald Trump, because they accurately assessed that the establishment is not telling the truth. And it made them so angry at what's happened, they said, I'll just pick anybody else. And Trump, the legendary con man, came along and pretended that he was on their side. And they're like, okay, we'll go with him. And soon the left wing will be just as angry. So I think the time is running out on the establishment, but we'll see.
What do you think the recent incidents we've seen, the storming of the Capitol and the way people have reacted to both the Democrats and Republicans, what has that revealed about the underbelly of American society?
Martin Luther King had this great line about how riots are the voice of the unheard, but nobody ever applies that to January 6th. But I actually think it should be applied to January 6th as well. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't arrest people that broke into your Capitol and that committed violence. They should be arrested, and I'm glad they were. By the way, as usual in America, the elites who planned that, Peter Navarro, he wrote a book about it, Eastman, Bannon, Trump, they get tried years and years later only because Donald Trump is running for re-election. But the average guy, they get tried and put in prison right away. The average guy has no rights in America. The elites, even if they planned January 6th, were protected for 2.5 years by the Biden administration. So that's how this thing is going. But yes, you have riots breaking out because of police protests in the year 2020 because of George Floyd. That's on the left wing. Then on the right wing, you have January 6th breaking out. And now in polls, 20 to 30% of the country is saying that it might be time for violence. And that is a very scary place for America to be. America's never been in a place like that. And the reason it's happening is what the media will not acknowledge. It's because the American people hate the establishment. They understand that it's the rich and powerful serving the rich and powerful. But the American media is part of the establishment. They're part of the rich and powerful. So they keep saying, no, it's not. No, it's not. Your lives are great. The economy is great. Who cares about rising prices? No, everything is great. Corporate rule is great. Status quo is great. You shouldn't have health care. You should have student debts. Houses should be totally unaffordable. You should do everything in favor of corporations. And people are starting to revolt.
What happens to the younger generation now then, Cenk? We've got the issue of jobs being lost to AI and automation. We've got obviously a sliver of the young generation protesting, showing that they have this kind of strong feeling about politics and so on. But by and large, what do you think is happening to the next generation?
So the next generation is in a lot of trouble because their wages never kept up with productivity. You remember how I told you, I wrote in my book that they changed the laws in 1976 and 78? And you see in the graphs of American economy, productivity is sky high. It goes like this no matter what. It keeps rising. Part of the reason productivity is so high in America is because we went from one person working in the family to two people and sometimes even more working in the family. So our productivity is really, Americans are working really hard, okay? But in 1978, the wages go like this and they flatline. They were rising for 40 years. They were rising along with American productivity. But once corporations took over, their wages flatlined and they haven't gone up since. So when you factor in inflation, our wages are barely where they were in 78. Now, when you look at costs though, housing prices are 4 times larger. Student debt is now twice as large. You can't keep up with this. And what's happening is corporations are taking all of the profits and they're getting the average American to a point where they could barely survive. And they have to work for corporations, otherwise they'll lose their health care. And they're worried that their family members will die if they leave a corporation. So you see the power that they are amassing. But when you have that kind of oppressive power, at some point, a pipe blows, meaning like you have a gas leak. You have something where you go, enough, we can't take it anymore. So for now, the one good thing is we have record low unemployment. And you give Joe Biden credit for that. I'm honest. Whether I'm upset with one policy or another, I'm always honest and fair about his accomplishments and his lack of accomplishments. In this case, low unemployment. The minute the unemployment goes high in America, you're going to see a lot of civil unrest because young people are barely hanging on. The minute they lose their jobs and have no hope is the minute that the American government is in trouble.
Cenk, if the future is so potentially bleak, where does change come? Who can change it?
I'm positive about who can change it. So look, America has had 2 choices my whole life, and it's been a false choice. So there was Republicans, but they were corporate Republicans, almost all of them. And what that meant is they just did whatever the donors told them. And in the beginning with FDR, the Democrats actually represented real people. But now, since 1978, they've been taken over by corporate Democrats, and they only serve their donors. So even if you voted for a Republican or Democrat, you're always going to get the same answer anyway. The donors win and the average American loses every time. Then another 2 more options came up. Populist right, Donald Trump. Populist left, Bernie Sanders. Unfortunately, all of American media and all the American politicians, including all the Democrats, piled on against Bernie Sanders and said, don't pick Bernie Sanders. Don't pick him. Okay. It got so absurd that even though Bernie Sanders is Jewish and is the most successful Jewish politician in American history, they started calling him anti-Semitic. So this is insanity. But all of the propaganda went to suppress the populist left. So that only left one populist option, Donald Trump. That's why he won in 2016, and that's why he's winning right now in 2024. But the establishment can't see straight. So they're giving them 2 terrible options, populist right, which is going towards fascism, or the establishment status quo corporate rule. But America doesn't want either one of those options. So what they want is populist left, where you actually stand up for the average American. And you stand up for, not based on left wing or right wing. When we raise wages, we raise everyone's wages, whether they're on the right or the left. When we do universal health care, we give everyone health care. We don't ask, hey, are you a Republican or a Democrat before we give you health care. So the minute someone comes up from the populist left and says these very, very popular things, they're going to take off like a rocket. They're going to take over the Democratic Party. But they just have to get past television. In America, television is the great destroyer of the dreams and hopes of the average American. Television represents the rich and powerful, and all it does is suppress the rest of us.
Well, both the media and politics you paint as a fairly dirty business now. And it does make me wonder, you were going to run for the Democratic primaries, presidential primaries last year, and then withdrew earlier this year. What difference did, well, first of all, I'm curious as to why you did. You're not born as a US citizen, which I think restricts you anyway, but what difference did you think you could make?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons why I ran for president. Number one, I was positive that Joe Biden was going to lose, and I was right. I said it a year ago. They said, "Oh, you're crazy." I said, "Look, guys, I study politics for a living. That's my job. You don't just look at the poll numbers, which at the top level, which Biden was already losing. You look below that. How is he doing with different groups? He already lost the young. He lost Latinos. A Democrat can't possibly win if he doesn't have Latinos and young people on his side. It was over a year ago, and he has no ability to turn it around. He could barely speak. Everybody knows this, but they denied it for a year. Now, Politico is writing an article this morning about, the Democrats are in a panic. It turns out Joe Biden is going to lose. I told you he was going to lose. I didn't think I was going to win. I thought if I push Biden enough, that others might enter the race. They have a lot of popular governors, the Democrats do. They would be 10 points higher than Biden. But Biden is an egomaniac. And he says, no, I am the most important person. It must be me. I'm going to get all the glory. I'm going to be a two-term president, et cetera, right? That's who Joe Biden is. So I was trying to point out to people who he is. Now, also, yes, I'm a naturalized citizen. And it is a deep injustice that people think we're not allowed to run for president. I believe that we are. I believe the 14th Amendment gave naturalized citizens due process and equal rights. I actually think it's indisputable. We're almost definitely going to win in court one day. But it is a very difficult task. Here I am, just a talk show host online. I'm not even born in America. No one in the Democratic Party establishment supports me. They hate me for saying things that are true about the Democratic Party. And I still got 2%. If you think 2% is not high, it was higher than 3 Republican governors. What that is saying is, give us anybody but Biden. And that was exactly my point in running. And unfortunately, I was right. If Biden doesn't withdraw from the race now, it's a near guaranteed loss for the Democrats.
Do you still have political ambitions?
So listen, I don't want it to be me. And when I announced the run for president, I said I'm an emergency candidate. I tried to get about 10 other people to run. I begged them to run. Joe Biden is so weak. If any decent politician ran against them, they would have won the primary. They'd be the Democratic candidate now, and they'd beat Trump, who's also unpopular, and they'd be the president. But they were all cowards. So I tried in a desperate attempt to make a difference here. In terms of me in politics, I don't want it to be me. I love media. I love telling people the truth. I love what we do at the Young Turks. And I love that I'm connected to the people and that they power me. And it's the greatest job in the world. So what I'm looking for is any populist on the left who can rise up and actually be a real candidate in the Democratic Party and beat these corrupt politicians. And it could be someone outside of politics. For example, Jon Stewart in America. He's a comedian. He does a show called The Daily Show. He's gotten bills passed from outside of Congress to protect people who were first responders in 9/11. He's a wonderful, decent person, and he's popular, and he's a celebrity. Donald Trump was a celebrity. And so, by the way, Ronald Reagan was a celebrity. So it could be someone like him who actually believes in the American people. It could be a labor leader like Sean Fain, who's actually strong and represents the average worker. It just can't be the regular old corrupt politicians.
It is interesting. A lot of people used to say that they had to go to The Daily Show with Jon Stewart to get the real news. So let's spin this back round to the international,
That's right.
The international perspective. What happens now if we've got Joe Biden and Donald Trump as the main contenders for president? You've given a clear assessment of both of them from your perspective. What happens to the USA on the global stage? There's talk about the global south rising, China, India, and so on. What happens to the US on the global stage in terms of strength and influence?
Well, if it's Trump, we're in a lot of trouble because history has shown this over and over again. In China, they had the largest navy the world had ever seen. Their ships sometimes were 100 times larger than the European ships. And one emperor decided that he was going to insulate China, and he burned all the ships. Once they stopped trading with the world and interacting with the world, they shriveled away, and Europe rose up and dominated. So you have to engage in the world. If you don't engage in the world, you shrivel up and your empire dies. And that's what Donald Trump is proposing. He's saying, let's close ourselves off from the rest of the world. They don't look like us. They represent change. I don't want brown people here. I don't want Muslims. I don't want Latinos. I don't want black people, etc. That's a recipe for disaster. And he has a vicious and violent ideology and policy anyway. And he doesn't even believe in democracy. Joe Biden has a lot of faults, as you've heard me say here. But he's not going to close us off from the rest of the world. And besides which, he's barely in charge. There's a whole infrastructure of the American government. The right wing calls it the deep state. That's not exactly right. The deep state used to exist before. It doesn't really exist now. But there is an infrastructure of the government, and the president gets to make a choice here or there, especially a feeble old president like Joe Biden. But basically, if Joe Biden is the leader, we're going to keep on going in the exact same direction we've been going in, for better or for worse. But at least that engages in the rest of the world.
Well, Cenk, it's great to have your no-holds-barred perspective. Thank you very much for giving us the time, and we'll see you on the Young Turks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate that, the people all across the world allow us at TYT to exist and to deliver the news honestly. And I appreciate programs like yours that deliver honest news. So thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. We'll get you back for sure.